In a world where horrid stenches and piercing screams come not from the realms of fantasy, but from the nightmare of reality. Come two heroes, bonded by love and the kind of desperation only parents can know.
No! God, please, no! No! No!
Behold, RPGs and Baby Makes Three, the greatest podcast in the history of all podcasts, by parents who have made a podcast about being gamers with a baby. Did I mention it's a podcast? Here are your hosts, Gretchen Hilmers and Rob Hessler.
Episode 10, Rob Hessler here with, let me see.
The exhausted Gretchen Hilmers.
The perseverant Gretchen Hilmers.
Ooh.
The constitutional Gretchen Hilmers.
Wait, constitutional?
The one who stays awake, yet all of life's factors say that she should be asleep right now, Gretchen Hilmers is my co-host.
I'm a champion. I got this.
You are a champion, and so are all
You're
of you.
a champion, though.
Well, I am kind of a champion.
Yeah, you are. You were my champion. You saved me after last night.
Well, all of you out there listening who have kids and who are like us and have a young kid, or if you just may remember back to when your kid was young.
Or you have a cat that yowls all night long, or a dog.
2 words. Sleep regression. If you know what that means, I love you. We're here for you. Here is a podcast hug for you. This is episode 10. We're happy to have you listening in, and we have an awesome episode lined up for you today. We're going to have Amanda Plageman back on the show today to talk about some of the topics that we've got lined up, including a lengthy email that she sent us about a previous episode. And speaking of emails, we're going to start this show here by taking a snippet out of an email that we received from our good friend and listener, Drew. He actually sent a really incredibly interesting email. Drew, awesome. There's a lot in here, but it's quite long and it is very philosophical. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull one snippet out of it and we're going to revisit some of these topics at a later episode. But we wanted to mention the writer's block paragraph that he wrote in this email. So I'm going to read this and then we can kind of discuss a bit. I'm an amateur writer myself and have been working off and on a series of fantasy novels. I definitely experience writer's block from time to time, and I've never considered using the resources you mentioned, lists, randomizers, etc., to help get unstuck, but I definitely will now. Because my story is squarely planted within an existing mythology and body of folklore, I already borrow some bits here and there and have some of my plot points silently mirror scenes from that folklore as a sort of Easter egg. As a result, I can usually just go spelunking through Wikipedia articles and the original folklore stories whenever I need a little push, and I wonder whether this would also be a viable strategy for some DMGMs when looking for new avenues for their stories. First of all, thanks, Drew. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Good luck on your fantasy novel series. I had no idea, but if you ever need anybody to read it, I will read it. I love reading fantasy.
I like reading. It'll take me a long time to get through.
It will, but I mean, like, well, I'm pretty voracious with the fantasy now. Now, if you got to put it like in a PDF or something like that, so I can read it on an e-reader or something. If you really want me to read it quickly, but anyway, we're getting ahead of ourselves and we're getting off topic. I love this idea.
Yeah.
The folklore idea and stealing from that. So stealing.
Paying homage.
Paying homage. So it's so funny. I'll give a little anecdote here, and I was playing in this AD&D 2nd edition game this past week, And we had this opportunity to use this, I guess it was a magical item, you might say, where you could tell a story. It was a magical kabuki theater. So you could speak your story into the kabuki theater, and it would translate it into that sort of kabuki style. And we all had the opportunity to tell a story into the kabuki machine, right? And so you were put on the spot as a player, like to tell us a cool story. So I told the story of Conan. Conan the Barbarian, from the first movie.
God, you love those movies.
I do love, well, I love the first movie.
Okay.
I love the first movie. I don't even really love, did we rewatch the remake recently? No.
If we did anything the last year and a half, I do not remember.
I might want to rewatch the remake if we haven't already recently rewatched
Oh, wait, the remake?
Yeah.
With Jason Momoa?
Was he the one? Yes. Yeah, we did recently rewatch that.
Yeah, but I don't know that we finished it.
Did we not finish it?
I don't think we finished it.
Parents out there, you're with us. You understand. You grasp this. But the point is that we had an opportunity as players to share a story. So, like, I'm in the middle of the game, and I had to share a story. And so basically, like, I made up a new story. I made up Conan. I just changed the names, and it was a spider cult instead of a snake cult, but it was all the same. I mean, it was like, I basically just, as Gretchen likes to say, borrowed the story and told the story there. So, I mean, don't we kind of all do that? I have actually the Grimm's fairy tales on my Kindle right now that I want to read. And I want to read it.
Ooh, the originals?
Yeah. Not only because I just want to read them, because I feel like...
I'd like to read the originals.
Yeah, I feel like as a rite of passage, I should just read those.
Yeah.
For, like, what I'm into. But I'm also going to take those elements and use them in my games. Like, I already know that. You know, probably Supernatural is sort of what I was thinking. Or, like, Supernatural-based games rather than, like, a D&D game. But, yeah, I mean, I love that. Like, as Drew is saying here, just really going and taking a resource that is easily accessible. Like, Wikipedia. I mean, it's, like, as accessible as there is. And just pulling from it. And like changing some of the names, maybe changing around some of the details, or even in the case of like these old folk tales, which are not copyrighted, like you can just use them.
Yeah.
You don't even really have to cite a source or, you know, hide the fact that you're using them. I mean, Drew was talking about using them as Easter eggs, essentially, in his stories. So like, he even knows he's doing that. And I love that idea, like just taking from that. And I mean, again, it was like what we were talking about during that episode and talking about writer's block, creative blocks, just taking from whatever's around you and being willing to do that. You don't have to come up with all your own ideas all the time. Like, I think that's the big takeaway here. You can just get your ideas from other sources.
Yeah.
So, good stuff, Drew.
You just got to use everything. It's a kitchen sink approach, right?
Yeah, and it doesn't even have to be the same genre, I don't think. Like, you can read, like, for example, right now I'm reading Dune, because I was told that they were good, but then the movie's coming out, and I kind of want to read... I know I've seen the David Lynch version of Dune, but it was, like, ages ago, so I don't really remember. But I want to read the book before the movie comes out, because I know I want to see the movie, but I don't want to see the movie and then read the book. I want to read the book first, you know,
right.
Which is probably going to ruin it for me, whatever. But I would gladly use any of that stuff in a fantasy game, in a modern game, like any of the stuff that I could take from that, I'll take from that for my stories that I'm telling as in role-playing games. Like, totally. Why not? I mean, even if it's not the same genre.
Yeah. I don't know. Anything and everything.
Anything and everything.
Yeah.
So thanks, Drew. We really appreciate it. And if you want to send in an email to us, you can do so at rpgsandbabymakes3@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you.
And that is also spelled out 3 or the number 3.
Right. Yes.
We'll take emails from either of those.
God, send us some emails.
Yeah.
Well, we really do appreciate it, and we really take them seriously. And we have gotten some just incredible emails from people that are really thoughtful, and we're going to continue to read them on the show. So, anyway, let's go ahead and roll for initiative.
They see me rolling. Some people are born lucky. Let's roll.
Roll for initiative.
All right, G, let us talk about our week in gaming. Well, last couple of weeks in gaming were a little late on.
Yeah, we failed our con check.
We failed our con check. We had Mother's Day, and I just want to give a little shout out to all the moms out there. Whether as you posted up in the RPGs and Baby Makes 3 Facebook page, whether you're a mother of a child, a fur baby, your fish, whatever it is.
Whether you're a den mother of a misfit group of gamers.
I loved that statement, actually. That was really funny. Yeah, happy Mother's Day to all of you out there. And, I know that can be hard for some people out there. So, we're sending you out some good vibes now for those of you who struggle through Mother's Day. So, know that we understand that. And we're thinking of you, too. So, we got wrapped up. So this episode is coming out a little bit late. But we have been doing some gaming, although I'm taking a couple of weeks off from running the Dragonlance game right now. And our next Dragonlance game is going to be live and in person.
Are we doing that?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Our next game is going to be the first in-person game because now, by that time, everybody in our group will be vaccinated and 2 weeks past their second shot. So, according to the CDC, we can gather together in that small group safely without wearing masks and play the game. Now, we could have done it with masks before or played outside, but it would just be like, for 3 hours without wearing a mask. And then we also like to do food and all that stuff. So I wanted to wait until it was really safe and really comfortable. And we're going to be doing a live game in person for the first time in ages.
It's going to be weird.
It is going to be weird.
I don't want to do the dishes.
Neither do I. Lincoln, you're up on the dishes. Speaking of weird, we also got a Troika game coming up this Friday.
Yeah, Florida Man.
The Florida Man sphere. It's called Cocaine and Alligators is the supplement the zine that is we're playing from for Troika. Troika is an insane game, and we did a review of it a couple of episodes back. You can check that out there in the show archives there if you want to hear about Troika, but we're going to be playing that. But other than that, we haven't really played a ton of games. We played Amanda's Ravenloft game, and we had taken a really long break because people couldn't make it or one reason or another, including us at one point. And we've had back-to-back totally role-playing sessions, no combat whatsoever, that basically involves this nice old lady who's turned out to be a hag.
Well, I mean,
I didn't trust her from the moment we saw her.
Your character drank the weird concoction she offered up. Only my character was smart enough to not do that.
But I kind of liked that. It definitely felt a little bit, I don't know, a little bit nerve-wracking, a little bit uncomfortable. And then at the very end, we found out that she was a hag. We found this hag's eye, and then she rode away on this, actually, your character ended up speaking to the animals, and we learned that she flew away on this, horrific beast monster, and we're like...
Yeah, but, I mean, it's a horrific beast monster, but it just kind of does its own thing, apparently, and it's not going to mess with you unless it's hungry,
sure. Right? Mm-hmm.
And by the way, that is my favorite spell.
Speak with
animals. God, I love that.
Isn't that an awesome... In any game, speaking with animals, it's so cool.
Can Tick-Tick get speak with animals?
Tick-Tick can get speak with animals. Well, a version of it. I think so. That's a good question.
Oh, man.
I don't know.
It's your game.
That might be it. Well, I wouldn't want to steal Brian's thunder.
Brian doesn't speak with animals.
We should tell him to speak with animals. He should do more animal stuff. In fact, he should get animal companions to run around with you guys.
Yeah, that would be kind of cool.
Brian plays Malachite, a ranger druid who is, woodsman, but he actually really loves the Captain Malachite thing. He became a ship captain at one point during the game, and he loves that. So, may or may not be going back on the ship pretty soon. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think we are. It's going to happen. Don't even pretend like
we're
it's not.
one session away from completing Castle Amber, and that's going to be the live session. So that's really cool. I think you're on the last session.
I mean, that's been a 4-month thing.
Yeah, right. So this will be session, I believe, 22 of playing Castle Amber. So quite a long way. And we're on session 56 or 57. So we're in that range there. But But yeah, we've got a lot of really great games coming up. The RPG Connection Discord group that we're a part of is doing the June the Earth Stood Still, a sci-fi month, and there's a bunch of sci-fi games that you and I are going to get involved in. Some that we have never played before, and then one that we had before, Lasers and Feelings.
Oh my god, I'm so excited about that.
Yeah, and it's
that's how Greg ran Lasers and Feelings. It was so uncomfortable. I was so uncomfortable. Oh, my
weird.
Lord.
It was weird. There was a...
What is love?
What is love? We had to teach an alien organism love.
With orgasms.
Yeah.
Good job, Captain.
That's right. I had like really high feelings, so I had to do that. I wasn't the captain. The beginning.
Oh, you're like the first man.
Yeah.
The first mate.
Yeah. Lasers and
You're
Feelings.
Riker. Basically, you play.
I was Riker.
Yeah. Okay.
Lasers and Feelings. The game starts off with nobody's the captain. The captain. Something happens to the captain, and they're like in the medical pod and can't interact. So it's the rest of the crew. That's the way the game works every single time. So nobody's in charge. You know what I mean?
That always goes well.
Yeah, and then you have to solve the missions from there. And what's cool about the Lasers and Feelings game we're going to be playing is that a DM, a game master that we've played with a few games before, Junior Brave's Guide to the Apocalypse, and I believe he ran 10 Candles for us as well. He is going to be running Lasers and Feelings, and he's a great game master. And so all of you out there know, I mean, half or more than half of the fun of the game is the game master doing a good job of running it. That doesn't mean that they have to be Matt Mercer and have to do like voices and do all of that stuff, but just a tight running of the game, a well done running of the game. And I think that it makes all the difference in the world. So anyway, that'll be fun. Shall we get to the beef of the show?
Oh, God. You know, it's so funny is we didn't mention beef for the cooking episode.
No, because we did all like vegetarian food.
I know, but don't you think we would at least try to make like I don't know. You should have made a dad joke. You failed your dad joke, Jack.
Are you telling me that you have some sort of beef with me over the last episode?
I do have beef with you, Rob.
See, there you go.
Moo.
Well, let's head into the common room and meet up with our good friend Amanda Plageman. Here we go.
Hey there, welcome to the common room. Sit anywhere you like.
All right, we are in the common room here with our good friend Amanda Plageman. She's really like a part of the show. Like we say our guest, but like we've talked to you about this already. Like you're a part of the show, so we're happy to have you back on.
She just
here.
doesn't have to change the diapers or anything. So
Well, you know what they say: fish and house guests stink after 3 days.
Yes.
Yes, which I really like that saying.
I love that saying too. Also, cat vomit stinks right away.
Yes, it does.
And it permeates the area.
That's a true story from this morning.
All
I'm just
vomit
going to say.
Yeah, I've never known any vomit to not permeate.
All of our parents out there listening have certainly walked out with their child in their hands first thing in the morning, getting ready to go, and stepping into a pile of cat vomit and then looking around your house and seeing vomit everywhere.
Aww.
And you have your child who is very interested in everything.
Oh, of course.
So that was my beginning. That was my beginning of the day.
Yeah, that's vomit that didn't come from him.
I know. Magic. Well, look here. Let's get into the seriousness here. And you sent an email. Like, it was a really good email about X cards, because we recently did a segment on X cards, lines, veils, and X cards. And Gretchen and I have been getting really interested in safety tools, to be honest with you, because we never used safety tools before. We just played games with our friends, and we kind of read the room. Like, you could tell, like, if you said something and it was like clearly rubbing somebody the wrong way amongst your friends, we would just sort of like be like, okay, well, maybe I'll stop doing that. Or if you were the kind of person that wouldn't stop doing what was obviously bothering somebody who was in your friend group of players, you'd probably talk to them, and then if they still did it, then you just would no longer invite them to the game. And that's kind of the way we always dealt with it before. But now, especially with online gaming being such a big deal, lines, veils, X cards, safety tools, where you're playing with more and more with people that you don't necessarily know, they become a bigger thing. And we were sort of advocating why we thought some of these were good tools, but you had a bit of a counterpoint, I think, to the X card. So let me kind of throw it to you there, Amanda. We're not going to read your very well thought out and well written email, which I really appreciate, but kind of explain the point that you were making about X cards, because I think it was really interesting.
Well, okay, first let me say I absolutely fully support the existence of a safety mechanic that will stop the scene in the moment, as opposed to having to predetermine it, or like a line or a veil. That's absolutely necessary. It's a good thing. It needs to be available. The problem is that the X card, as designed, is a flawed tool. Mainly because anytime a safety mechanic is put into place, it should ideally facilitate communication, and the X card actually shuts down communication, which to my mind is counterproductive and problematic. Because the thing about the X card, you were absolutely right in that it's a no argument allowed thing, but the way most people use it and the way that it was originally intended, it's not just no argument, it's no discussion. It's a way to prevent anybody from having to feel embarrassed or shamed that they have a problem with something that's going on in the scene, and then to be further embarrassed or shamed by having to explain themselves. But by not explaining yourself, you don't have the opportunity to figure out exactly what it is that's a problem. So if you've got multiple elements in a scene, you have no way of knowing what it was that was problematic, and therefore you can't avoid it in the future.
Well, I think that's a really good point. It's interesting because you gave some really good examples in your email. You mentioned, you were sort of talking about a hypothetical scenario where you kind of describe walking through this corridor, and there's like cobwebs and rats and the sputtering torch and it dark and everything like that. And then somebody throws out the X card, and you don't know if it was the rats, the terror inspired by the sputtering torch, the cobwebs in their face. You don't know what it is.
Exactly.
And so you can't make certain that that issue doesn't arise again in the future. And I think, to just put a punctuation on that example, and why I think, well, first of all, I think that's absolutely a great example, because there are multiple things, like cobwebs brushing across your face. If somebody has like a fear of spiders, like, oh my God. Or if somebody has a fear of rats, like that's a pretty common fear. Or a fear of the dark, or like being without light, like
claustrophobia,
claustrophobia. Yeah, that's right. In the scene, you also described claustrophobia. Those are all very common phobias. So like it could be any of them. But what I thought was interesting, we recently played a game where somebody put up a veil for eye trauma.
Yeah, that was really interesting.
Right? And I will say, and just to be totally clear, this player was not the kind of person, and because I think that some people who hear about these safety mechanisms think, oh, people are just being like overly sensitive and like, you man up, quote unquote, right? But this person was not like opposed to, like, if somebody's head got ripped off in the same scenario, like, and it was like a pretty twisted scene. We actually were playing low stakes, which is comedic, low stakes, which is based on what we do in the shadows, and it was comedic, but it was also like violence and blood and just very descriptive in all of its way. And so there was the veil of eye trauma. Now, I could imagine, and you've played in my games before, and the way I describe scenes where maybe somebody's getting like killed or something, and I get very descriptive.
We've had kill scenes with eye trauma.
Yeah, like I could do that and not. Yeah. And if an X card was played,
poor Addie.
I would, right? I wouldn't understand that it was specifically related to a tiny detail when maybe they were okay with everything else, and maybe even not only okay with it, but maybe they enjoy a graphic description as long as it doesn't include that one specific detail.
Exactly.
So, like, in that case, the veil worked out because it ended up being where they told us before the game. But, like, imagine you don't, I mean, to that, you have to be, like, really in touch with your own personal feelings to recognize that eye trauma is something you need to say is a veil.
Or you need to have had it come up before and had that trigger flipped.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and this is so fascinating because I really agree with the idea of the X card, but I'm also, you know, years of therapy and marriage counseling have shown me the importance of communication and being open and honest. And so, you know, I didn't really think about how, okay, what was it? I mean, I think in some scenarios it could be totally obvious. But I think in others, it could be very subtle, and you are kind of left wondering, like, what is it? And how do we avoid this going forward? Or, you know, what if you did an entire game on something that would cost someone an X card? Like, wow, I just didn't think of it.
Exactly. Like if you've got a spider trigger and you unknowingly sit down to a game that's full of drow and the Underdark and the Demon Web pits, you're not going to have a good time.
You're going to have a bad night.
Yeah.
You know what's funny, though, is like, and what I think is interesting about this is that I always set a line at sexual violence and sexual assault. I mean, like, those for me, like, I just don't need that in any game. And I set a line at it. I just don't really think, like, I don't really want to play in a game that involves that kind of thing even sort of being referred to. Now, I don't mind if you want to say, you know, the character is vicious and a terrible you know what I mean? Like, you can create the idea that would almost even imply that this person is capable of doing those acts as long as we're not specifically referring to those acts, right?
Right.
But I mean, I don't think that's like, I think most people would probably, the vast majority of gamers are going to kind of feel that way too. I mean, nobody really wants to, I mean, I don't, as a dungeon master or game master, I don't really particularly want to describe scenes that go to that level of, I don't mind psychological horror, but I don't really want to go into the detail about those kind of things anyway, right?
Right.
But the way that what you're kind of talking about, and with the X card, is like, it flips the switch, the scene ends. Whatever is happening ends, you move to the next scene.
Right.
There is no way to know what in that scene can continue to be a building block of progressive scenes coming afterwards.
Exactly.
And what must not be. It's like removing a chapter out of a book.
Right.
Like, and you can't refer to any character that was in that chapter.
Exactly.
And that's tough. That is really tough on
and it's kind of
GM.
Unrealistic.
Yes, right.
Yeah. And it's tough even from a purely mechanical perspective in that, well, that scene that you might have just X-carded, I might have been planning for that to be maybe 45 minutes of the night session, and suddenly I've got 45 minutes to fill. Well, better hope that I'm good at improvising.
Well, it's interesting, and I kind of want to move into a sort of a broader discussion about safety tools in general beyond even just the X card, and because I thought, since we had this conversation, I was thinking about something. So there's a game that I'm interested in running called Weirdwood, and the Discord group that Gretchen and I are really actively involved in, the RPG Connection group, is very good about using Lines Veil's X card and an open door policy too, which is another safety tool which we didn't talk about in our episode, but it's essentially like at any moment you can just get up and leave. And you don't need to explain yourself. You can just leave. If you're feeling uncomfortable, you can get up from the table and leave, and nobody's going to question it. You know what I mean? And which is fine, actually. I actually think that actually kind of makes it a little easier in a lot of ways. If you're not feeling comfortable, rather than asking the game to change, you remove yourself from the game.
Question though, does the person using the open door policy do they announce that they're stepping away and that the game should continue, or
Yes.
do they just okay? Good.
Yeah,
They don't.
I believe so.
Go. Okay.
I've only seen it from the outside, not in a game I've been a part of. But from what I
Gotcha.
understand, you say, I'm going to be stepping away from the game, continue on without me. And
Gotcha.
it's that simple. You don't have to explain yourself, but there is the courtesy of, I'm out.
Right. Because
Continue
otherwise, folks might stop to wait for you to come back.
Yeah, or like
would be
ask, is
awkward.
everything okay? Are you doing okay? Or you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like, and like it could turn into something.
Mhm.
But so there's this game Weirdwood, and Weirdwood is a realm that exists connected to our realm that has been created by all of like the dreams and nightmares and imaginations of everything that people have had over the entire history of time.
So
it
there's
can-
an option of a lot of messed up stuff happening.
Yeah, but the game is specifically geared. It's toned darkly.
Good.
The creator of the game also made a soundtrack that goes along with it, and if you listen to the soundtrack, you get what the game is supposed to be, and it's dark. The game is
Nice.
dark, right?
Mhm.
So I want to run this game as part of this sci-fi month that they're doing in this RPG Connection group, right? And there's the Lines, Veils, and X card are a big part of that group. So I put the game up as an advertised the game. I will be running this game, and you can join the game. But I also made a little caveat here, and I said like Lines, Veils, and X card. But this game is meant to be effed up. Don't join a game where you're exploring the dark nature of nightmares if you're sensitive.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, so that's another part of
So
it. It's like
Basically, people need to take responsibility for their own comfort to a degree.
Exactly. Safety
Yes.
tools are useful, but you also, as a player, need to think, am I stepping into a game that my own issues are going to alter it to such a great extent that it's going to really impact what the very nature of the game is, A, or B, the expected enjoyment of the remainder of the players? Because people that are going to play Weirdwood that I'm going to run, they want they're expecting to join into a dark game.
Excellent.
I mean, well, they should be. And most of them probably will. If somebody comes in and they're like, well, I have a veil over psychological terror, then like, well, you can't, or something like, I mean, I don't know, like serial killers or creepy trees, or I don't know, you know what I mean? It's like, it's at a certain point, it's like, we literally cannot play the game with your lines and veils. We need to play a different game. And so like, that's another thing that kind of, another challenge in walking that line with Lines, Veils, X cards, with safety tools in general, and like the notion of having a dialogue around those things is because I want to be understanding of people's issues, but at the same time, I also want to play the game that I'm planning on playing, whether I'm running or playing.
There's nothing wrong with having those issues, but in having them, you're also responsible for putting them onto other people. It's one thing to say no eyeball trauma. You can work with that even in a dark game. It's another thing to say no trauma.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting too because we're playing in a Ravenloft game with you, and part of like the reason why I want to play in a Ravenloft game is because I want messed up stuff to happen. And like the last game we were playing, there was the hag and she got on some monstrous beast and flew off, and our last combat encounter was with this like horrific creature, and I feel like in the last few sessions,
that was horrific.
Awful. I feel like in the last few sessions I'm starting to feel a little bit more of like the terror of that world. And like at the end of last session too, I was like, oh my gosh, she's gonna come back, and like we're now kind of like and my character squashed the hag's eyeball, which is like a taunt, but also like what he would do. But like I want that. Like I'm playing the game because I want to feel uncomfortable.
Exactly. Discomfort is not a bad thing. unfortunately, as much as I love safety tools, I can't help but think that some folks are too quick to reach for them. I mean, if you're genuinely uncomfortable, if it's something is genuinely going too far, by all means, safety tool out in whatever manner seems best to you. But there's nothing wrong with being a little bit uncomfortable.
Yeah.
There's really not.
I mean, that's
So,
what gets
I
my
mean-
adrenaline going in a game. Like, that gets my blood, like, I can feel my heart pounding. I can feel anxious. Like, I want to feel that. Like, from a game, like, when you're telling a story and it becomes that internalized, that's when, for me, like, a lot of the time, that's when I know it's good.
Exactly. When you trigger an emotion, you're doing something right.
So, Amanda, you played in a lot of mixed company settings. How many times has this come up for you?
To find this in this context?
The X card?
Never.
Never.
I have never once been in a game where there's been an X card. I've only once in hindsight been in a game where, had there been an X card, I'm sure that it would have been used. And that was the incident that Rob mentioned on the previous podcast with the torture scene. That
Okay. Oh, you were there. You were part of that.
I was
huh?
running it. And
Oh,
I
God.
should have stepped in sooner, and I did not, and that was on me.
Well, it was a weird, I mean, I had never dealt with a situation like that personally and just to refresh people who maybe didn't hear that episode, there was a scene where another player was enacting a very detailed torture sequence in the game, and it was a Pathfinder Society game, which is like everybody shows up and plays this one-off together, and it's totally random people that can show up, although everybody there knew each other except for me. I was the one person who didn't really know everybody, although I knew you, and I might have known one or two others there, or at least kind of knew them by reputation or name. That was weird. So, like, I didn't know how to even react, like, on a personal level. Like, but see, the thing that's interesting about that specific scene, if something like that happened in our gaming group, like, let's just imagine our home table.
Sure.
We wouldn't need an X card.
No.
We would say, this is like, can we move on from this?
Yeah,
And it would be
exactly.
fine.
Right.
And most likely the person who was doing it would, like, get the message, and it would never happen again.
Exactly. And I mean, in that instance, it was weird because it just went from 0 to 60. It started out as an interrogation. And there's nothing wrong with that.
No.
There's nothing. I mean, he had tied the dude up. Fine. He had threatened to torture the dude. Okay. Not the end of the world. But then he actually got started doing it.
Wasn't it a woman? It was a woman.
Well,
it was
the
a
player
woman.
was the player was a male. He might have been.
The NPC was a woman, though.
I think
too.
probably so. Yeah.
That added something to it for me as well. I mean, I think I don't know. I guess maybe I'm more uncomfortable with violence towards women than I am violence towards men. I just, maybe some old school mentality there. But I mean, it's just still. But yeah, I mean, like, that's the thing too. And actually, you know what? What's the weird thing is that, like, I don't really want there to be graphic torture, but I could also like in that game. But I could also imagine a scenario where I could play in a game where I wouldn't really have a problem with that. Like, since that game, and since I've played in games with lines and veils, I don't recall ever putting up a line or a veil towards torture. Like, if we're playing an evilly aligned game or something, I might be okay with it.
Right.
Like, it's weird. That's one of the things that's so challenging about this kind of thing.
And part of it too is I think that there was no preparation. You didn't have time to wrap your mind around it. You didn't have time to settle yourself mentally. You didn't have time to come to terms with what was going on. It was just suddenly there.
And I was playing, like, the most happy-go-lucky, friendly character, Emery Thicketmain, a halfling bard, who was like the most friendliest, loving type of character, who just was a nice,
And
so
suddenly there's other characters using kitchen knives, and oh dear.
Yeah, I was in it was in that mind space too, like, of the childhood wonder kind of thing. And like, I think if I was in the mind space of dark game, nefarious characters, then I can kind of, like, my mind has set up that that structure. Like, when you sit down and you watch a horror movie, you're ready for a horror movie. But if you're watching like a kid's movie and then all of a sudden one of the characters starts like, going homicidal, like stabby stab, then it's all of a sudden you're like, that's when it's like jarring because you're not really ready for it. Like you said, you're not really ready for it. So interesting. I mean, this is such an interesting topic, and I think it's going to continue to be an interesting topic. I don't know if we were discussing it specifically in relation to our Lines, Veils, and X-Card topic, but I know that 6th edition Dungeons and Dragons is probably in development right now, and there's a lot of discussion about what the game is going to be. And I think safety tools have taken on a much, much greater role over the past year since 5th edition has come in, and even with the player base is more thoughtful about these kind of things than we ever were. That's just not the way we thought.
Right.
And a part of, we also didn't really play online. Like, we didn't, have this kind of...
For that matter, back in the day, there just weren't that many groups around, so you tolerated a lot more in the way of awkward behavior out of your fellow players than you otherwise would.
Yeah, but I also think that maybe in the groups that we've played in, it has been safer, but there are some pretty bad stories out there of situations characters and players have been put into where I think safety measures maybe should have been thought of ahead of time.
True.
And I think it will benefit the game as a whole by having some of that instilled from the beginning, from the actual game rules themselves.
I agree.
Because I think some people like to jump on it's not in the manual. And I think just kind of establishing like, hey man, this isn't cool, will go a long way. And
yeah, it's better to have the tools and not use them than to need them and not have them.
Exactly. Kind of sucks we even have to mention that, but whatever.
Yeah, well, this is why we can't have nice things.
Well, I mean, just like with any fandom or any hobby or anything in life, there's a wide range of different types of people who are involved, and there's always going to be problematic people. There's problematic people in gaming. There's just as much as there is in the corporate world or in movies
everywhere
you look. There's
it's always got to be someone to ruin it.
There always does have to be somebody that ruins it, but we won't ruin it. We will continue to be awesome about it. And so if any of you out there have some questions about this and want to throw in your stories or your thoughts about X cards, lines, and veils, or really anything else that the wonderful Amanda Plageman has talked about in this particular segment, you can do so at rpgsandbabymakes3@gmail.com. Let's go ahead and move to our next segment. Let's make a proficiency check.
All right, folks, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here.
Hey, what's going on?
We look at the person through the peephole.
You talking to me crazy? Maybe if I get lucky, we get a little action adventure of our own going, you know what I'm saying?
Proficiency check!
All right, so proficiency check. Now, this is a fun one. We're going to be talking about theater of the mind versus battle maps or scenario maps. So right before we went on this recording, Amanda, I thought it was really fascinating because you've used battle maps like all the time when I played in Pathfinder Society with you. You do a great job. I remember you did a boat one time that I played on. It was so well done. I loved navigating through it. It was a really hard scenario, too, if I remember correctly. It was a Pathfinder scenario. It was a higher level one. And you've used those maps, but right before we went on the air, you're like, I actually prefer Theater of the Mind, which I thought was so funny.
Oh, yeah.
But the system you were using and the game style that you were playing kind of got you into using battle maps. So for those out there listening, why don't we describe these two things? Why don't you describe like what a battle map is, what a scenario map is?
All right. Well, a battle map or a scenario map is a piece of paper or a whiteboard or a Roll20 screen, whatever, that has a usually gridded image of whatever piece of terrain. It could be forest or a dungeon or a abandoned mansion or whatever else. And usually it's divided into 1-inch grids or sometimes hex grids. And you'll have minis to represent the characters and the monsters. And you'll move tactically, since each mini will have its allotted amount of movement per round. And that way you can know exactly where everything is on the battle map. They're usually very richly illustrated, often they're works of art. It allows for tactics, much more so than Theater of the Mind does, that you can say, well, I'm flanking that bad guy, which gives me this bonus, but if I move over here, I'll draw an attack of opportunity. Whereas in Theater of the Mind, you don't necessarily have that granular, gritty tactical element.
To dovetail off of what you just said, I think it allows for many more of these sort of optional rules.
Yes.
You know, I'm most familiar with AD&D 2nd edition, although I've played all of the editions at this point. And there are a lot of those really small rules, like combat bonuses for being at a higher elevation, for example, or you mentioned flanking or rear or shield side versus sword side of the combatant and things like that. None of which we play with in my AD&D 2nd edition game because we don't really need it. It just speeds up combat. But when you're doing a battle map, you're not really trying to speed up combat. It becomes its own event. And of course there is a real basis. I mean, there's a foundational element to that. I mean, these games came literally from tabletop war games.
Exactly.
So it's really, these things came before Theater of the Mind. So it's as D&D as Theater of the Mind is, for sure. And of course, is there anything more? Well, okay, here, for a me nerd person, when I go to a convention and somebody has a kick butts, for the kids out there, a kick butt total landscape that they're going to run their game on. Or if I'm online and somebody has like, here's the final battle scene for X thing in some module, and it is strikingly there. It's amazing. And it really is so cool.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I've seen some, and I'm a big, obviously a huge Dragonlance fan, and I've followed the Dragonlance groups, and I've seen people create these battle maps for the iconic Dragonlance scenes from the original modules. That's
commitment right there.
Yes. Final scenes that are like, I mean, it's like they created the details from the novels and the modules down to the blade of grass.
Yeah.
And it's striking and stunning.
And
it's absolutely nothing I'm interested in getting involved in. It's so much work.
It is.
It's so much work.
But that's part of it too. Like, there's this one Pathfinder Society scenario that the bulk of it involves this giant staircase that's built into the side of a cliff. That it's giant, literally, and that each stair is like 15 feet high. It's built for giants.
Oh, good God.
And somebody for a convention actually built that entire set piece.
Oh, my God.
For their game. It was 5 feet tall.
Oh!
It took him weeks to build this thing. And the minis were actually appropriately scaled. And you actually played the entire game on this 5 foot tall set piece. And it was amazing.
That's incredible.
Yeah. But part of it too, I mean, yes, you can just buy the pre-made battle maps, and that's what most people do, and it's probably for the best because drawing those things out takes forever. But the act of drawing them out, the act of making these bits of terrain, it's like painting minis, that it's its own separate but equally entertaining adjacent part of the hobby.
For sure. I think that that's a really good way to describe it, because I think, like, for example, we have a good friend of ours who does not really play RPGs much at all. His name's Adam, and he's a very talented artist. You've probably met Adam before at one of our board game barbecues. Adam is an avid board gamer, and he loves painting minis.
Oh my God, he's so good at it,
and
too.
And he is phenomenal at it. He's the best miniature painter I know personally.
Awesome.
They look as good as any miniature I've ever seen, like in real life. They're just amazing. And he's bought games like, you know, Mansions of Madness or
Blood Rage,
and painted all of the figures, and it's incredible.
Labyrinth. I think he did Labyrinth as well. Yeah.
And they look perfect. They're staggeringly beautiful. And he doesn't really play RPGs. So he'll play fun. Yeah, and he loves to do the minis. So it's kind of just a secondary thing. Now, for those who don't know what Theater of the Mind is, that's probably what most people out there are playing for the most part. And Theater of the Mind is essentially you using your imagination. You're imagining the scene in your head based on the descriptions of the game master and the players working together to describe what is happening. And out of a lack of the kind of funds which would be required of me to purchase something from like Dwarven Forge or whatever, where everything is already pre-created and beautifully done, and the lack of time because I have a child to actually be interested in creating these battle maps, and also just my love for use of imagination and the limitless possibilities that using Theater of the Mind versus a drawn battle map offers. I've always done Theater of the Mind. I've always enjoyed that. And the occasional times when I've tried to create a battle map, it's always felt a little bit lacking. Like I always sort of feel like it's not quite adequate, and it's almost limiting. Like I feel like alterations to the terrain that happen during the gameplay, because you know players, they do stuff.
They do stuff.
And your carefully laid battle map probably doesn't look like your carefully laid battle map after about 3 seconds of the players doing anything whatsoever.
Hey,
but of course, you can
I'm feeling personally attacked here.
That's one of the things I love about gaming is when the players just do totally unexpected things and go and manipulate the world in a way which I never expected.
Of course, by the same token, when you're really committed to the Maps and Minis lifestyle, somebody creates a 30-foot tall tree on their turn, which you certainly weren't expecting. You reach into your box and you pull out a tree mini and you put it on the map.
True. Now that is right. And you mentioned here in the chat the storage issue. Which, I mean, the book storage is already an issue for me. The gaming materials is already an issue for me, let alone adding miniatures. But you know what, though?
My closet is devoted to Maps and Minis. Just nothing but Maps and Minis.
I got to be honest with you, though. I appreciate those people who sacrifice their money, time, and storage space to create those beautiful setups that I can just enjoy looking at and being afraid to kind of touch because they're so incredibly well done.
Yeah, you know you want to touch them.
I do. I would really love... I've never played in a game that had a really nice battle map landscape, fully created kind of thing. And I wonder if I would have different feelings about it. But to be honest with you, I think at this point in my life, you know, with a kid and with all the storage issues and with the financial requirements, I don't think I would ever do something along those lines. I think my inclination would much more likely be to go towards a printed map, because now printers are better too, where they have the images printed onto the map. So like, let's say there's like overturned cart and like dead bodies around. It's literally printed onto the sheet that has a hex grid or a square grid printed on top of that.
Exactly.
And then I would use skinny minis.
Yeah.
Which, for those who don't know, they're basically just flat miniatures that stick in a stand that have cool pictures on them.
Yep.
Skinny minis. I like that.
I like that.
Yep. For that matter, there are also what amounts to adult color forms. If you remember those from the 80s when you were a kid. They can be anything from monsters to terrain pieces. So if you have an overturned cart, I can pull out a vinyl cling film overturned cart and put it on the map.
That's awesome. See, now that to me is kind of a more viable and more suitable for my personal taste, because it allows for a lot more easy to access customization in game, because I need it to be like totally customizable, and there's nothing more totally customizable than your imagination.
Right.
It's a fascinating topic, and I'm curious. I'd love to hear from some folks out there who really get
I
into
actually
this.
want to chime in here because I'm coming in as just a player. And, Amanda, you've used battle maps with the Ravenloft game, and Rob, you do Theater of the Mind with Dragonlance. And I really like the freedom of flexibility using my imagination. And I don't know, I think there is this, I think you're right. It can be very limiting. And I also I don't know, when I'm playing with a battle map, I see everything as those squares. And I think in some ways it does kind of halt the imagination process and being in the story itself. It's really interesting to really, to sit down and think about how it affects your imagination and your flow as a gamer. And I see them that they're necessary in several ways at times, but I think there is benefits and pluses and minuses to each.
Yeah, there's the cliche that when the ROLL play starts, that the ROLE play stops, which it doesn't have to be the case, but it often ends up being so.
Well, it's interesting because I actually think that both have a place. So, and it sort of depends on the game. But I will kind of share a little bit of an anecdote, which I think is fascinating, is that for years I played when I just played in person first. And then when I started playing online at all, I played via Skype. And so we had video. And the method of I want to speak was to raise a hand. And so like you'd raise your hand and then because we had a lot of players and you could know you want to do something, you want to chime in or interrupt the scene or whatever. So that way the DM would know, okay, you can chime in. So when we recently started playing a lot more in Discord and there's no video and it's purely audio, what I found was interesting is how much more vivid the games have become for me because I literally I'm not seeing another human being on the screen. And I'm playing with people who, I mean, like all three of us, we spend a lot of time when we're playing our games speaking in character. Mm-hmm. And so even if we're not using like a funny voice or whatever, like for example, you don't speak in a different voice when you're speaking as Melanora in my Dragonlance game, but I very clearly know when you're speaking as Melanora, you have a way of speaking that is Melanora's way of speaking, right? Mm-hmm. So if I wasn't seeing your face and I'm just hearing this, it would be like all I would be doing is envisioning this sort of haughty, high elf, red-robed wizardess. So what I've noticed is like cutting out all visual sensation has actually allowed me to get even more out of the imagination aspect of it. And I really have found there's something valuable there. There's something there.
Counterpoint, though, when we're in the Ravenloft game and we have one of our players who regularly doesn't turn on his camera and perhaps
so awkward.
Well, it can be somewhat awkward, though I understand there are reasons for it, and no complaints, no condemnation. But it can be so much harder to know. Well, is he enjoying the game? Is he distracted? Is he unhappy? Is he waiting for a chance to chime in, but we're not letting him speak because we can't see his face? You get the more vivid imagination, but you also lose some interpersonal connection. Lacking video.
Yeah.
Fair. More immersion, but less playing a game with friends and having all of that other stuff. It's a really good point. I think that's a really, really good point. Because it is sort of hard. Using their brain meats. That's a really fascinating point that I want to think about more because there is something to that. And I think that you're looking at that game specifically and thinking about that person in the game. And as the game has gone on, the rest of us with our cameras on have formed sort of a bond. Mm-hmm. And even though some of us knew each other, some of us didn't, it does feel like, oh, hey, how are you doing, person who I see on the screen? And we have like the pre-game conversation stuff, or maybe we're taking a break and we talk a little bit about it and we ask about each other's lives and stuff like that. But I never felt really
excluding. But
no,
we kind of are.
Yeah, I never felt inclined to make those same inquiries with the person who wasn't putting the camera on, and there was no personal reason for that. I didn't have any.
He's a great guy.
Yeah, so that is a really fascinating and interesting sort of thing. Now, I will say for the Discord group, what's interesting is that there's a secondary layer which comes into play, and that's that during the game, that's true, but that group is very interactive in between games. So there's a lot of conversation about other games and gaming philosophy and ideas, and you start to get to know the people you're playing the games with outside of the game by having conversations about like what they like stylistically and what they're interested in, and then you start to realize like and who they are as people, even like, you know, and what they do in their lives. So it's not the same as in real life or with a video, but you do have the opportunity to get to know these folks. Whereas like the person who had their camera off in your game never interacted in the in-between game interactions where we would like literally just be BSing with each other sometimes about random stupid stuff, or like maybe somebody would share a recipe, or like, oh, I made this food item, or you know, whatever it might be. Like they never engaged in that way. So we didn't have any of that in-between stuff either. So well, it's a fascinating topic, and I would really love to hear from some of our listeners about their experiences using theater of the mind versus battle maps. And now this new topic of interest, like creating that interpersonal connection that we kind of discussed there by just going audio only, or even we could take it a step further, which is like text only games, which I think could be really interesting. Because I'd love to discuss in greater depth the notion of immersion at some future episodes. So we should come back around to this topic and discuss that. So anyway, email us at rpgs@babymakes3 if you've got some commentary on this. We'd love to hear all about it. Let's move into our final segment of the episode. Let's move to moans and groans.
Don't worry. I'm not gonna do what everyone thinks I'm gonna do. Flip out, man.
Look, I've got a major problem, okay?
Hold up. Wait a minute. Something ain't right.
You have no power over me. Groans and moans.
All right, so this might be controversial. So we put this in the moans and groans section, and that is subversive characters. Gretchen, you're going to lead us off with this one because you're going to talk about your subversive character for the game Mothership that we recently played. We talked a little bit about this on a previous episode, but we use it as the basis for this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty exciting. It basically, you should think of Mothership as aliens, and I played an android, and as an aliens, the android is kind of going to kill everybody. Sorry if that's a spoiler, or if you haven't seen Aliens at this point in your life and you're listening to this, I move along.
I think 30 years is well long enough for people to have seen the movie.
I would hope so. But we do have a new generation out there, you know.
Oh, in case it needs mentioning, in Titanic, the ship sinks. Spoilers.
God, I've never seen it, Amanda. I've never seen Titanic.
And so, you know, at a certain point in the game, I asked the game master, hey, can I betray everybody? And he was super excited about it. But at the end of the game, when the GM was asking for feedback, one of the players was like, you know, made the point, I wish I'd known that this could have happened. Like, this is an aspect of this game, you know, because I think they went into it trusting that we were all doing a cooperative thing, which I think in a lot of most games you are cooperating. But I was I think I had a rough day at work, and I was like, you know what? F it all. I'm going to blow this up. And I did. And it was kind of, I don't know, I thought it was hilarious and exciting. But I think most people were okay with it, but someone wasn't. And then it kind of becomes this question, if you're playing a character who is intentionally subversive in a cooperative setting, or is your character being subversive because, you're being a jerk? Like, what are the differences? How does this work in a gaming scenario? Do you feel okay about this? Do you think it should be stated ahead of time? Like, I think there's a lot of interesting questions that are brought up. And, Amanda, I'd love to hear what you have to say about this. Like, what's your take?
Well, first of all, I would say that there's a huge difference between being subversive in a one-shot versus being subversive in a campaign.
Absolutely. Well stated.
I think that's really important.
The other thing, it's probably not reasonable to go into it too deeply on this episode, since it probably deserves its own entire segment. But there's something called a group template, or a session zero, that most games would benefit from having, though not all actually end up having, where you discuss things like that. You discuss inter-party conflict, and you discuss subversion and that sort of thing. That's also where your lines and veils can be brought into play. And there are certainly people that are very much team-oriented, cooperation-oriented, that will be extremely disturbed by unexpected subversion like that. Like our friend and y'all's guest, Bianca, she is so team-oriented. It's all about
the show up with pom-poms, really.
Yeah. Yes, she is the most supportive team, yes. And I can pretty much guarantee that she would have been profoundly unhappy, especially if she didn't know it was coming. I, on the other hand, would have probably found it hilarious and only been annoyed that I didn't get to it first.
The game master was Aaron Sturgill, who is the head guy behind Trail of Dice Games. So he is an RPG designer, minimalist RPG game designer. So he's a great game master. He knows his stuff, and so he navigated it really well too. And that's another component there that I think really needs to be taken into account. Who is the person running the game, and can they in the moment make the decision that is well informed by their own experience as a game master and by the game that you're currently playing and by who the players are. I would never allow something like that, for example, to happen in a game that I knew that Bianca was playing. Right. But I would absolutely allow that to happen in a game where it was the two of you. And because I know you would probably think it was fun, and I know the two of you trust me as a game master, so it would be like something that I could kind of get away with. And I will tell you that this was part of a series of games called March into Horror. So we all knew we were screwed. There was a chance we could, of course, come out victorious and succeed in survival or whatever was the goal of that particular game. But I don't think anybody was going to be upset going into it if everybody died in a nuclear explosion like we did. Thank you, Gretchen.
You're welcome.
I think the other thing, too, it somewhat depends on whether or not the subversion is in character with the personality that's been established for that character. Like, I'll give you an example. The vampire LARP that I used to play in, there was one guy who had a character that had been established as being very gentle and humane, and he's a vampire, so of course he's a monster, but he was probably the best human that a vampire could possibly be. And when he then turned around and pulled a subversion move, if anybody else in that game had done it, it would have been expected. It would have been expected, it would have been rolled with, it would have been moved on. But when he did it, it actually caused problems.
Wow,
Mainly
really?
because, it did. Because the way that he went about it, it actually ended up damaging the long-term story of the game.
Whoa!
Because
what
we had...
happened?
Well, basically there had been long-standing drama between the players in the Savannah game versus the players in a neighboring game, to the point that we had all just sort of politely agreed to stay in our own backyards and not interact with each other. And if that character had sold out the Savannah game to any other nearby game, it would have been fine. But he sold us out to the problem game.
Oh.
Basically, he invited people from the problem game to come in and completely seize power and take over our game.
Oh.
And on the one hand, it made perfectly good sense in character. His character got something out of it that he wanted. It worked. But it did some severe damage to our game. And a lot of folks actually ended up not really looking at the player the same way after that. Which maybe that's going too far. Maybe that's allowing bleed to come in. But, you know, when somebody pulls something that problematic, you can't necessarily go back. But by the same token, that was a years-long campaign, which is a totally different thing than a one-shot.
Yeah, that would be really frustrating to go in on a huge campaign like that and then it pretty much implode.
It's one thing to lose 4 hours or so of gameplay. It's another thing to lose 4 years.
Wow. And I was saying, I would argue, too, that what Gretchen did in her subversive move actually enhanced the game.
It sounds like it.
Yeah, and I think that that might be the trick. Is
what he did not.
Yeah, and ultimately, it is a game.
Yes.
And the purpose is to have fun and or fulfillment out of it.
Exactly.
And that is not just our own personal fun and or fulfillment, but the overall vast majority group fun / fulfillment. Yes. And I think that any decision that we make, which severely and long-term impacts that core component of playing games, to me, is something that you should really consider very, very, very carefully before you do it.
You might end up doing it anyway, but you need to be real sure.
Yeah. Well, we are going to definitely talk about you brought up a couple of really amazing topics. The session 0 and group templates, we're gonna definitely have you come back on for that. I want to talk about that notion of feeling real feelings from a game, or being, you know, impacted in real life by in-game stuff, because I think we should have a discussion about that. I don't think that that's out of the ordinary. I think we get emotionally invested in these characters. We're telling deep and meaningful stories. These games are, to me at least, they're powerful. They have they're powerful storytelling mechanisms, and can profoundly impact us personally. So there's nothing weird about feelings by something that happens in the game.
Right. I mean, I've never made a character that was not on some level some reflection of some part of me.
It's impossible. Never. Literally, it's impossible not to, because you don't know how to reference something that is not at least somewhere in you. And sometimes we want to explore a darker side, or maybe even a lighter side of who we are, or a more carefree side, or a more serious side, or whatever it might be. But that's so fascinating. It's such an interesting story, and I'm really curious to hear what our listeners have to say about their subversive characters, because I really do not have it in me to play a subversive character. I feel too bad.
I didn't think I had it in me either, but you know what? I did. I blew that up.
I could totally do it for a one shot, but for a campaign,
no.
Honestly, I'm afraid that if I did it, it would be almost a revenge instrument, and that's just petty.
It's interesting. I'm very interested in this game called The Desanction, which I know you are as well, Amanda. Gretchen, you're going to be interested in it because we're going to force you to play. The Desanction is a supernatural RPG based on the writings and sort of history of John Dee and in Queen Elizabeth and sort of all the Elizabethan era stuff. And there is a mechanic in it where a character can become shaken by something that happens in the world and take on a negative personality trait that is essentially subversive. So I was listening to an actual play podcast of a game of Desanctioned where one of the characters became, because of seeing a supernatural event happen, became arrogant, loud, and argumentative.
Nice.
And the player then, whose character before had been working with the rest of them, started to be like belligerent, pushy, annoying, generally unpleasant to play with. And that was a mechanic built into the game.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was interesting because it was like the mechanic was you become subversive and an impediment because of what's happened, because you've been shaken by what you've seen. So, and I'm sure this isn't the first time a game has used such a thing. I mean, I'm not...
Exalted does something similar.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that there's a place, that's another interesting sort of angle on subversion. Like, if you're playing in a game where maybe that is it. And to me, that excited me. And you could even hear, like, the other players navigating around it, you could hear in the actual play podcast that because they were prepared and knew, they enjoyed the fact that this guy was being hard to play with.
Right.
But it was like also the game. So they were like engaging with it.
Yeah. By the same token, though, that might also be an excellent instance where safety mechanics are still viable. In that, yes, that's part of the game and everybody knows it's part of the game, but it's still not a bad idea to pause every now and again, check in, are we okay? Cool.
That's a good point. Really, really good point. Yeah, because it's interesting too. Is like I've played characters that could be offensive, and in those very rare cases, I kind of do make sure: is this are you guys cool with this? And also, just to make it clear, I am not this character.
Exactly.
It was interesting because we played in a game of Cthulhu, and there was a guy we were playing with people from all over the world, and there was somebody who was, I believe, playing from El Salvador, and I was given a pre-gen, and my pre-generated character was of Latin descent, and I wanted to use a fake Spanish accent. But I asked the player first if he would be okay with me, because I didn't want to be like insulting his heritage.
Excellent.
And he was fine with it, and he actually thought it was great. Yeah, and I was terrible at it, and he loved it. That
you
I was
did a really good job.
Okay,
I mean, come on, we lived in LA for almost 8 years. I mean, this.
But
this
to
wasn't...
him, who's a native speaker, I'm sure it was
True.
terrible. But yeah, again, it was like checking in and making sure, and that was like outside of the bounds of like the normal safety tools we think of. But that's just sort of keeping that in mind.
The one other thing I wanted to say about subversive characters. Unless you're with a group that you already know well, like presumably the one that y'all were playing with Mothership, that you had already interacted with them significantly through the other games and the other Discords and all, the first time you interact with a new person, the first time you play with them, is usually not the time to be subversive. First impressions last!
Well, then my first impression for at least one of those people is not good.
Oh, Gretchen has an enemy. Do you remember who it was?
And we could ask him, would you ever trust me as a player? That wouldn't be awkward at all.
No.
I can't imagine that it would have been more fun had Gretchen not done that. I think that Gretchen doing that made the game more fun, like in retrospect. Even if we would have succeeded or not, because what it was all working out to was a pretty straightforward sci-fi adventure game, and what it ended up being was an amazing twist at the end, which threw us all for a loop, and which you could not have done without Gretchen doing that. Like, none of us would have fallen for the twist otherwise. So
I'm not typically a person who can play a character that does that, but I don't know, it's just a combination of a really long, hard day. I don't know. It just worked for me. So it was kind of fun being able to explore that. And that's what I like about one-shots is you can kind of explore parts of maybe your personality, but just, things that you wouldn't normally do or who you are. Like when I play video games, I could never take the bad guy path. And the one or two times where I said, you know what, I'm going to do it. Like with Fallout, especially, because you can get pretty twisted with Fallout. I felt so guilty. I quit early on. I just couldn't do it. I'm not this person.
That's so sweet.
Oh, is it?
You're so innocent. Except when you're not.
I'm not innocent.
Ever.
It's interesting. I can't be evil in video games either. It's like it makes me feel bad, even though I know I'm just playing some sort of like robot little bit piece thing, whatever. Yeah, so if you're interested in sharing your stories of subversion, send us an email at rpgsandbabymakes3. We would absolutely love to hear all about what you've got going on with those stories, because I think that this topic has a lot of facets that are really interesting, and I would love to hear your stories about them. We're going to leave you here, Amanda. Thank you again for coming on the show this week, and we're going to we got to have you back on now to talk about these other topics that got brought up. So we will talk to you very soon.
Yes, thank you so much.
So ends another episode of RPGs and Baby Makes 3.
Yeah.
Sure was
exciting.
Great. It was a good one. I love having Amanda Plageman on whenever we can. She's awesome. She's just got so much good stuff to say.
She's got good brain meats.
I love it that she uses the term brain meats. It's so funny. I love that so much. She's so cool. And she's got obviously a wealth of gaming experience, so it was awesome to talk with her again this week. If you are interested in talking and sending us emails about any of the topics that we discussed this week with Amanda, or just anything that you've got related to RPGs, babies, or if you just need help, email us at rpgsandbabymakes3@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you, of course. And you can, of course, find us also on YouTube, Patreon, all these places that you can find us. And we would love to hear from you. Oh, and you should leave reviews, positive 5-star reviews on iTunes and stuff.
Only positive 5-star reviews?
Yeah, and like and subscribe to the podcast on YouTube, because apparently that means something.
Does it?
Well, we don't care about that kind of stuff, but you know what? I guess it does, because then more people hear it. So that's good.
Yeah.
I guess more people hearing it. I mean, we are kind of a big deal.
Should we bribe people? Maybe not yet.
You know what? There might be stickers in the future that we might bribe people with.
Pins.
Pins are awesome, actually.
Enamel pins.
Enamel
They're
pins.
They're so hot right now.
They were so hot like 2 years ago, dude.
Well, we don't know that. We've been stuck inside for over a year.
True enough. Maybe they're hot again.
Yeah, it could be super hot. Danger, hot. Danger.
Hot, danger, hot. That's what we say to our kid between 3,000 and 5,000 times per day.
Yeah, he doesn't listen to us.
No, of course he doesn't.
Yeah.
Well, that's about it for this week's episode, and we will talk to you again hopefully in a couple of weeks. We're working on a couple of really amazing things. We've still got our Edition Wars episode coming up soon, and that's all in the works, actually. We're not far from that.
And I'm researching one that I'm really sad excited about, and that is, it mostly pertains to women, but I'd like to hear stories from men too about uncomfortable situations they've been placed in their gaming groups, and how to make a gaming group more inclusive and protective of its members. So yeah, I'm out there looking for stories, and I would love to hear some. If you are listening and have a good one, please email us. We'd love to talk to you. And good one, I also understand, could be very sad and tragic, because those stories are out there.
And also, but if you could also send ways that you've come up with solutions to the problem, because I think that that's also good. We want to share some solutions. We don't want to just tell the horror stories, which unfortunately are far too many. And Gretchen has shared some with me already, and it's just, when we will share a few horror stories, of course.
We want to hear stories of strength and hope as well.
Yes, exactly, because there are some, and I know for a fact that mixed and diverse gaming groups are not only possible, but they are thriving at many, many, many tables. Ours is
doing pretty good.
Ours is good. The Discord groups that we're playing in as well, also very diverse and respectful. So it can happen, and so we're going to be talking about that pretty soon. And we're also trying to line up some special guests, so we'll see how that works out. But we appreciate you tuning in again. RPGs and babymakes3@gmail.com if you'd like to reach out, and we will talk to you next week with another big hunk of beef.
2 weeks.
Yeah.
We get to dry age.
I'm gonna dry age our beef.
Yeah, it's more deliciouser. I miss meat sometimes. No, that sounds dirty.
Let's get out of here. We'll talk to you soon. RPGs and Baby Makes 3 is a production of Gretchen and Rob sitting on their couch. Email the show at rpgsandbabymakes3@gmail.com. You can find more episodes on Podbean, Spotify, and iTunes, as well as on our free Patreon page at patreon.com/RPGs and Baby Makes 3.